Hi there, Year 13. This is another screencast focusing on Unit 3, the written element. This time, looking at question 6. Just before we go on, to remind you that there are those 6 questions we need to answer for the written element, all of which need to be completed in just 3,500 words. This screencast is going to focus on the 6th question. How effectively did the social, cultural, historical, political context of the piece communicate to your audience? So it's essentially asking you to evaluate how well you communicated to the audience the social, cultural, historical, and or political contexts. That's really key, first of all, is that you do not need to mention all 4. You need to mention, though, the ones that are relevant to your performance. Alright? The ones that are relevant to your performance. So, let's think about that for a moment. Let's focus on those. The social, cultural, historical, and or political context of the piece. We're going to run through these questions, and then I want you to pause the video and take some notes. So the first question is what were the themes and issues of your performance? I've asked you this question many times, but it's important to think about them again when we think about this question. Most of these were decided way back when you started your performance and started the process of creating it. But these questions ask you whether you stayed true to those original ideas. So what were the themes and issues of your performance? Once you've asked that question, move on to question 2. How have these been informed by the social, cultural, historical, and or political context of the time in which your performance was set? So, if your performance was set in a time which is either previous or sometimes after now, you will have had to do some research into the time in which it was set. And you would have had to do some research into some or all of those areas and use that research to inform your performance, to make it accurate. What I want you to do is I want you to look through your research and remember your research. And for question 2, think of 2 of those areas. So social and cultural, or social and historical, or social and political, or political and historical. So I really want you to think of 2 of those things. If your play was set today, in this period, okay, then that's fine. You don't necessarily need to do that. But even though it is set today, it isn't really ever set today because you started it some time ago, and things have changed in the process of you creating your performance. So even if it's set today, the things you're talking about were really things that were happening last month, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, last year. So you still need to answer this question. Looking at the third question then, how are these informing the social, cultural, historical, and or political state of today? So draw parallels between what your performance, what your performance is about in terms of when it was set to today. That's why it's important, even though you're setting your play today, to link it back to actually what you're talking about. So, the London riots of 2 years ago now are relevant to today. How are they relevant today? A more closer thing is thinking about bankers and the money crisis. So how has that influenced where we are today? So even if your piece is set in recent history, you still need to answer question 2, because today, as in right now, is an ever moving state. So link those to what is going on today. And then finally, link it to your audience. So how is it relevant to your audience of today? Why are they going to be interested in you linking the historical or political context of the 1850s to today? What can they learn from it? Okay, so just pause the video and take some notes on those answers. Okay, once you've done that set of notes, I want you to move on and for each of those answers, I want you to think of at least 2 examples where and how these have been communicated. So we'll start with a broad brush example of how you think the themes and issues were communicated in your performance. Again, getting a little bit more deeper, think about examples of how the social, cultural, historical and or political context of the performance has been communicated, and moving forward. A really important thing to consider is the amount of words that you've got to write, and it isn't very much. So the examples, I really want you to make sure they are really, really specific. So really focus in on your character's entrance, for instance, a line that your character says, 2 or 3 movements that your character has. So really specific moments rather than broad brush describe moments. Okay, so again, pause the video and take some notes on that. You should then have about 8 to 10 examples. Okay, once you've got those examples, I want you to now evaluate each and every one of those examples. Okay, evaluate it looking at those 3 questions. Right, the first 2 are compulsory. The third is needing answering if it does. Right, so first of all, how effective was it? Okay, that links us directly to the question, and that really is a simple yes or no. When you write it in your paragraph, it's going to be, this was a much more successful way of communicating. Okay, it's the answers to questions 2 or 3 that really count. So the second question is, why was it effective in communicating? What was it that you did that was really effective? Was it because you changed your voice and that really communicated to the audience? Was it the way that you stood and your stance that communicated that your character was responding to the situation like this? In there, you've got to link it right through to the audience. So from your performance right through to the audience. So that links it to that question we were talking about in doing the social, cultural, historical and or political context of why was it relevant to the audience. And 3, if you need to, and I would suggest that you have 1 or 2 examples where you do. In fact, I would suggest that you have more than 1 or 2 examples where you do need to improve. You need to put specifically. So talk to your audience after the performance. Ask them what didn't communicate particularly well. And you need to specifically tell the examiner how you would improve it. And specifically, I mean by referring to key words, not just saying I would rehearse more, or the way we played that scene was awful. It's about you. So it's going to be about how you have done things, how you improve, how you're going to change your voice, you change your movement, etc. Okay, so again, that's a little bit more work than the first question. So for each example, you had about 8 to 10 examples. You need to answer those 3 questions for each one of those examples. And that's going to give you a really good set of notes ready for your controlled assessment. Okay, so pause the video now and just do that. Thank you. Okay, what I want you to do now is I want you to have a practice at writing the answer to this question. Obviously, the set of notes you're going to take into the controlled assessment with you. The practice answers are just there for you to help you understand how to write it and for you to have a draft. So you've got this process that we've just gone through, looking at the social, cultural, historical, political context of the piece, stating what those are, looking at examples of how those have been communicated, and then evaluating them. You need to turn them into a paragraph. And for this, we're going to use the point, evidence, explain concept. So we're going to start by stating the social, cultural, historical, political context of the piece that you are focusing on, giving those examples, and then evaluating them. So for this answer, I would suggest that you do 2 paragraphs. Okay, the first paragraph on one of the social, cultural, historical, and or political contexts that was successfully communicated to the audience. The second paragraph being one of those elements that didn't communicate successfully and therefore needs improving. And so for a rough plan in terms of word count, and I've given you 300 words for each paragraph, is to start off with paragraph 1, with your point being about 75 words, your evidence being about 100 words. You've got really concise and evaluating that 125 words. The second paragraph, you can be less on the word count for that, because so you've simply got to say is another social context of our piece was. Evidence, again about 100 words. This time, more words on the evaluative comments, because you're also going to say it didn't communicate it very successfully, and in order for me to communicate it successfully, if I was to do it again, I would need to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, so use this slide to help you write a draft of this question. You can give it to me to mark, or you can mark it yourself, or you can give it to someone else in your class to mark. A few things before I finish. I always want to remind you that you should be writing it from the perspective of your performance and I. This is what I did. You can have a little we, start with a bit of we, and then go straight on into the I. Be specific. Don't talk about skills, not about general things, not about rehearsals or about focus, about specific keywords. We already talked about success can also mean that things didn't go wrong, and we've also talked about being constructive on what you need to improve, not to say that you've improved it. Okay, so back to the rough plan. There it is. Write as many practice answers as you can, but remember the notes you take into the controlled assessment, the practice essays you need to leave at home. Alright? Okay, good luck. Thank you.